Back at it again, baby, and we got the brothers Thomas Sowell and Jordan Peterson. Let's dive in.
I learned that people who are ordinary people knew far more than I did, even though they were not intellectuals. And even though I had read more books than they had and so forth and so on. And I spent several years like that. And so I never had this condescending attitude toward ordinary people that so many intellectuals have. You know, I realized those people know a hell of a lot. And they knew a hell of a lot more than I did about things that mattered.
Hit that subscribe button, baby.
You don't want a factual.
Make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. Some people are getting unsubscribed for whatever reason, so make sure that subscribe button is clicked down below.
Description of every muscle twitch. You want them to distill their experiences down into the gist, which is the significance of the experience. And the significance of the experience is roughly what you can derive from listening to the experience that will change the way that you look at the world and act in the world. So it's valuable information, and they can tell you a terrible story, and that can be valuable because that can tell you how not to look at the world and act in it, or they can tell you a positive story. You can derive benefit either way, which is why we also like to go watch stories about horrible psychopathic thugs. You know, and hopefully we're learning not to be like them, although there are additional advantages in that, you know, you might say that someone who is incapable of cruelty is a higher moral being than someone who is capable of cruelty. And I would say, and this follows Jung as well, that that's incorrect, and it's dangerously incorrect, because if you are not capable of cruelty, you are absolutely a victim to anyone who is. And so part of the reason that people go watch anti-heroes and villains is because there's a part of them crying out for the incorporation of the monster within them, which is what gives them strength of character and self-respect, because it's impossible to respect yourself until you grow teeth. And if you grow teeth, then you realize that you're somewhat dangerous, or maybe somewhat seriously dangerous, and then you might be more willing to demand that you treat yourself with respect and other people do the same thing. And so that doesn't mean that being cruel is better than not being cruel. What it means is that being able to be cruel and then not being cruel is better than not being able to be cruel. Ooh. Because in the first case, being cruel, what it means, and so that doesn't mean that being cruel is better than not being cruel. What it means is that being able to be cruel and then not being cruel is better than not being able to be cruel. Because
absolutely. Absolutely.
In the first case, you're nothing but weak and naive. And in the second case, you're dangerous, but you have it under control. And you know, a lot of martial arts concentrate on exactly that as part of their philosophy of training. It's like, we're not training you to fight. We're training you to be peaceful and awake and avoid fights. But if you happen to have to get in one, and I guess the philosophy also is that if you're competent at fighting, that actually decreases the probability that you're going to have to fight, because when someone pushes you, you'll be able to respond with confidence, and with any luck, and this is certainly the case with bullies, with any luck, a reasonable show of confidence, which is very much equivalent to a show of dominance, is going to be enough to make the bully back off. And so the strength that you develop in your monstrousness is actually the best guarantee of peace.
I like that. Being able to be cruel but not being cruel is better than not being cruel, you know, not having that ability at all. It's not about being violent with anyone or everyone, but if that situation came about, you could handle it with some confidence. I like that. Great rule to live by.
Perhaps most important, this was very striking to me, perhaps most important, I grew up with no fear of whites. Why did you grow up without a fear of whites, and why has that proven so important to your intellectual life?
I think fear makes you have all sorts of sometimes irrational reactions to people. And I grew up, for example, obviously as a boy growing up in school, you get into fights and so forth. I grew up in the era of Joe Louis. Whenever I saw a white fighter fighting Joe Louis, he ended up on the floor. You know, so that was one thing. And when I moved out of my school in Harlem to a school in a predominantly white school, obviously from having been in Harlem and having had to fight and so forth, I was a better fighter than most of the guys around. So I had no physical fear. And then when it came to intellectually, I still remember an episode that didn't seem that big at the time, but I think it was. The first time we had a math test, and I was in this class for kids with IQs of 120 and over. And the math professor said, teacher said, I didn't think this was that tough a test for a class like this. And yet there was only one paper that had 100. So, and his name was, and he starts going through this thing, and he says, and his name was, and so I'm standing there, I says, Thomas Sowell. And he said, yes, that's the name. I was just being a wise guy. You know? But I never had the condescension from my classmates after that.
Ooh. The ultimate show of confidence. Hey, you know, there was one guy who got 100. It was Thomas Sowell. Of course, it was me. Come on, baby. Nothing wrong with a little bit of confidence. I love it. I love it. Fix your life and not the world.
One of the things that I've been promoting, I suppose, online is the idea that you should restrict your attempts to fix things to what's at hand. So there's probably things about you that you could fix, right? Things that you know that aren't right. Not anyone else's opinion, your own opinion, that aren't right. You can fix them. Maybe there's some things that you could adjust in your family. Well, that gets hard. You have to have your act together a lot before you can start to adjust your family, because things can kick back on you really hard. And you think, well, it's hard to put yourself together. It's really hard to put your family together. Why the hell do you think you can put the world together? Right? Because obviously the world is more complicated than you and your family. And so if you're stymied in your attempts even to set your own house in order, which of course you are, then you would think that what that would do would be to make you very, very leery about announcing your broad-scale plans for social revolution.
I'm going to quote you, and then I'm going to quote John Kennedy.
Okay.
All right? The Thomas Sowell reader. 4-letter words like love, duty, work, and save are hallmarks of people who make their own way through life without being part of some grandiose scheme of the anointed or of government bureaucracies that administer such schemes. Close quote. Ask not, John Kennedy said, what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. And I thought to myself, I believe Tom Sowell would answer John Kennedy and say, no, don't ask what you can do for your country. That's already presumption and arrogance. Ask what you can do for your family.
Yes.
Ask what you can do to take care of yourself. Ask what you can do for your neighbors. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely.
Stay humble. Okay. Stay humble.
I thought about that an awful lot, thinking about how to remediate social systems, because obviously they need careful attention.
Also, in terms of the last statement, taking care of yourself, I definitely think that is of importance, because I've stated before, if you can't take care of yourself, or if you neglect taking care of yourself, then it's impossible to take care of other people. You might be able to keep that up for a while, but eventually you break down. And if you're responsible for taking care of these other folks and you break down, not only are you not taken care of at this point, but now all these other people aren't taken care of also. So I think it's important that we make sure that we take care of ourselves. Let's continue.
An adjustment, and it struck me that the proper strategy for implementing social change is to stay within your domain of competence. And that requires humility, which is a virtue that is never promoted in modern culture, I would say. It's a virtue that you can hardly even talk about. But humility means you're probably not as smart as you think you are, and you should be careful. And so then the question might be, well, okay, you should be careful, but perhaps you still want to do good, or you want to make some positive changes. How can you be careful and do good? And then I would say, well, you try not to step outside of the boundaries of your competence, and you start small, and you start with things that you actually could adjust, that you actually do understand, that you actually could fix.
I learned that people who are ordinary people knew far more than I did, even though they were not intellectuals. And even though I had read more books than they had and so forth and so on. And I spent several years like that. And so I never had this condescending attitude toward ordinary people that so many intellectuals have. You know, I realized those people know a hell of a lot. And they knew a hell of a lot more than I did about things that mattered. And I remember from that era, I finally reached the point where I had to ask the foreman to borrow some money from him because
Foreman, what were you working at this?
A machine shop down on the Lower East Side, and to borrow some money from me from him, so I could ride to work on the subway and eat at the same time, and he lent me $5. And one of the most wonderful experiences I remember since then, decades later, when I'm in New York on a book tour, I phone him and invite him to dinner with his family. And we had dinner up at the top of the World Trade Center.
Oh, how wonderful.
And we spent the time, and when we parted, he and I were both on the verge of tears, you know, and that was the last time I saw him.
Wow. So 3 great rules to live by. Number 1, live your life without fear. Number 2, fix your life and not the world. Start with yourself, take care of yourself, worry about everything else. After that's already in order. Love it. Love it. Number 3, stay humble. I don't care what advantage or how many books you read or anything. Like Thomas Sowell said, there were people who weren't intellectuals, who hadn't read as many books as him, but they knew more information on certain topics and things than he did. And it's important. I like that we don't get in our own way of learning new information or gathering new information from people. And I want to say Jordan Peterson said this. I forgot exactly the way he said it, but something about going into a conversation as if the other person knows something that you don't. And I love that statement. He said something along those lines. If you remember that quote, comment it in the comment section, please. But when Thomas was speaking about the stay humble thing, that's what popped up in my mind. But awesome rules to live by. You guys can let me know how you feel about it in the comment section below. Like, share, comment, and of course, hit the subscribe button before you go. Peace and love. I'm out.